Are there any Chinese authors equally loved and respected inside and outside of the People's Republic? Well, today we're looking at one potential candidate. I'm Angus Stewart, and you're listening to episode 9 of the Translated Chinese Fiction podcast. But it's not just me. I've got a co-host. It's Claire Hao, aka Hao Shen Tong. So save me the effort. Claire, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hello, Angus, and I'm Claire, and my full name is Hao Chen Tong. I used to be an alumni at Edmund Napier University, and now I'm working in the publishing.
And that's how we know each other, because was it last year you were on the Edinburgh Napier Masters?
I think it was a graduate in 2014.
Oh,
so
okay.
So 5 years ago.
Oh, does that feel like a lifetime ago now?
Yeah, maybe not that much, but still 5 years. It's a lot of things I experienced and I learned. So I still miss my university. So I'm glad to know you.
Yeah. Do you miss the teachers?
Yes. My program leader at that moment was Derek Allen, and also I know Avril very well, and also my teacher was Dave.
Did he enjoy annoying students a lot when you were there?
Yes.
He's always trying to drive us mad. So Claire, where can we find you online?
I use my Twitter. My username is TONE826, and my Instagram account is ChenTongPub. It's a CHENTONGPUB.
We'll be coming back to yourself, but in the meantime, we've got two things to do. One small thing, one big thing. The small thing is the plugs. The big thing is our story for today. So let's get these plugs out the way. Listeners, if you want to support the show, i.e. if you want to help pay for the SoundCloud fee I've paid to get this podcast hosted, there's two places you can go. There's a wee website called Buy Me a Coffee. Translated Chinese Fiction podcast has got a page on there if you want to give a one-off donation and buy me a proverbial coffee. If you'd like to give a recurring donation in exchange for some bonus content, you can go to our Patreon, the Translated Chinese Fiction Podcast's Patreon page. Both of those sites will be linked in the show notes. And the good news is that after this episode, we will have our first piece of bonus content for Patreon. Me and Claire are going to have a little bonus chat about our favourite Chinese books. So if you want to hear that, you'll have to give us a wee something on the Patreon. And of course, if you enjoy the show, if you've not subscribed yet, subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. Tell your friends, tell your teachers, tell your pet monkey, because the more you spread the word, the more listeners we get, the more worthwhile the show is. So all that aside, our story for today is one you might have heard of, either in its original incarnation or its film adaptation. It's Lost Caution. It's by Eileen Chang, or as she's known by her Chinese name, Zhang Eiling. We'll probably be using both names in the podcast, so just remember Eileen Chang, Zhang Eiling, it's exactly the same person. The edition of this story that I read was the Penguin Pocket Classics edition, which contained that short story and 4 others, all translated by different translators. The sad story is I managed to lose that book on a plane very recently, so I don't have the book in front of me because I'm an idiot. Translation in that book was from 2007. It was by Julia Lovell. That 2007 translation was timed in line with the release of the film adaptation by Ang Lee, or as he's known in China, Li An. Both the English translation of the story and the film's English name is Lost Caution. So, Claire, you've got, if I'm not mistaken, both an English and a Chinese, the original Chinese version of the story just to hand with you. So can you tell me, where did you pick those up from? What editions have you got?
I have my Chinese version of Lost Caution when I was in the college, and I read this book earlier, maybe a few years earlier than the film officially released, and That moment, that book is only less than 10,000 words, I think. But it's really a good writing and very classical Eileen Chang. And I got English edition recently. It's from the Amazon, just the digital one, because the print one I still order and it's still on the way. So
Right. Cool. And had you heard a lot about Eileen Chang before you read the book, going up through your early years or the schools or through your friends?
yes, I actually the first time I know about Eileen Chang is from my friend's blog, and she was the literature student in the university at that moment. I know I studied in the college. Um, we find out that there's a lot of connections we have between art and literature, and we think Eileen Chang is very typical um, uh, person to present that connection. So the first time I know Eileen Chang is from her blog. She read a review about her book, Lost Caution. So that makes me decided to read about that book. That would be very interesting.
Okay. And I believe this was talked about a little bit on, well, I can't call it my rival podcast because they're a lot more successful, but the one other big Chinese literature podcast out there, I think it's just called the Chinese Literature Podcast, they were talking about how Eileen Chang is an author who's has respect and fame both in the Western English-speaking world and in her home country of China. So I'm curious to ask you, either before or after you studied in Scotland, did a lot of your pals or your people you know in China talk about Zhang Hailing, or is she a little bit niche compared to some other authors you hear people talk about?
I consider Eileen Chang is still a very niche. It has very specific readers in the UK or in my Western friends because her works particularly present the Chinese perspective about life and especially her present her insight about love. Maybe we can. That's what we do now because we can build up more connections about how she consider love and about women and the connection between men and women. That is the human nature thing which will deliver to the world readers and make them feel the same or this simultaneously.
Because that kind of thing's relevant everywhere. Doesn't matter who you are. And how about in China? Do you find with people you know in China, she's popular?
Yes, Eileen Chang is very popular. She was born in Shanghai, and even but she's well known across the whole nation, especially that is some her well-known work like Love in the Fallen City. Last Caution is only one of them, and another one is White Roses and Red Roses. I think you know about that. And her lots of works and adapted to the other form of art, like the drama. There's a very successful drama about white roses and red roses. That is very particular story. Describe a man dilemma into a two women and two different types of women, and how they reverse after you got one of them. So that's very interesting. Standing ground.
Yeah. Another thing that the two guys on the Chinese Literature podcast mentioned is that so in China, Zhang Ailing is right up there with a lot of the other really celebrated authors, but something she doesn't have that a lot of the other authors did is a museum. There's no Zhang Ailing museum. So I'm guessing if there ever was one, it would probably be in Shanghai. But can you imagine that ever happening, or what it would look like? Or do you think she's not the right kind of author for that?
I think it ever curated into some exhibition in Shanghai, was held in Shanghai maybe many years ago, and there's a lot of media like television interview about the original story of Zhang Ailing. They even to interview her old residents in Shanghai
Oh.
and or in Hong Kong, because Eileen Chang is the alumni of Hong Kong University, as you know, and so I think there will be the another even the maybe the larger exhibition happened, and I think it would be best. It would be very great for me to have this museum, so that well, people will know her better from the world.
I do know there's two spots in Shanghai where you can do a kind of Zhang or Lust Caution pilgrimage. I think there's an old cafe bar she used to go to that's still open. I think it's somewhere near Jing'an Temple. I never went there, stupidly, when I was living in Shanghai. And the other one, I found out about it when I was researching for this episode. So the character in this story, Jiazhi, isn't it? Yeah, Miss Jiazhi,
Yes.
she was based on a real life spy who did some similar things. I forget that lady's name. And
Yeah, her name is Zheng Pingru.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
yes, Zheng Pingru, and
yeah,
the man's name is Ding Mocun. That is very famous. How to say 刺杀? That's an accident to kill someone, assassin. I think that is
yeah,
the accident is a very shocking accident happened at that time. So
yeah.
that is the inspiration from where the inspiration from.
Well, if you're ever in Shanghai, yourself or the listeners, I know there's a statue to Zheng Pingru in one of the parks, and it's got a little plaque. I believe it's all in Chinese, and it says, "Here's the lady who was the inspiration for Lost Caution, the book and the film." So
Yes, that's a very bitter story and a
yeah,
tragedy story. But what I think, that is what I think the greatness of Eileen Zhang, because she's not like simply repeat the story. She just
yeah,
present the true character inside about this, and put the little person, like an ordinary person, into a very big historical background, and to tell us that's which her lots of works presented to us, that is the one's life's helplessness. Just
yeah.
we can't control our fate, and we can't control lots of things, and there's an enormous thing manipulate us, and which we
Yeah,
even don't know.
it's our emotions. If only we could get rid of them, that would be very helpful.
Yes, I think even though when you read Lost Caution, that is a simple story, and even the tone in that story is very calm and mild, but
Yeah,
it's very that. But if you read carefully, cautiously, you will find out that it's very extremely emotional work. Um, the lucky is An Li, the director, that film is enlarge that part and expand that part, which present to us. That's very great work.
yeah. I definitely got that feeling from Julia Lovell's translation. It was really simple sentences. Well, beautiful sentences, really simple. But the writing style was, like you said, totally calm. But and if you were casually reading, you might just slip through it. But when I focused a little harder, I was like, oh my goodness, this is actually quite intense if you read between the lines.
Yes, yes. I think that is. I like this translator very much as well, because she's very good at like selecting and narrating. Is that did I say it correctly?
Narrating.
Narrating. Yes, she the narrating of the story is precisely, and even and he will give you the implication, give readers implication about some signal was specifically hidden by Eileen Zhang. So that is what I think, and what this translator fantastic about.
on the topic of translation, so I don't know if it was herself or movie studios who picked the translation of the name to from is it 色戒 to lost caution?
色戒.
色戒
Yes.
to lost caution. Do you think that's a good translation?
Because 色戒 is the original name that's like the warning you, because it's a dangerous love. It's not like because love was supposed to be sweet or some romantic, but this not that kind of love. It's a need to be warned, and you'd better to keep it, draw the line from it. So that's the original meaning of it.
Right.
And then I think that both translation makes perfect sense.
Although when I see the title, the English title, I mean, it makes me think this is going to be a story about lust and caution. So not being careful and being careful, you could say. But you're telling me it's more like, look out, there's going to be lots of, strong emotional feelings, therefore be careful. And if you wanted to get that feeling, it would be a really stupid title, but you could call it Caution! Exclamation mark. Lust. That would look awful, so you probably wouldn't want to do that.
Yes, I think that's another interesting part is about this is when you read the novel, you will realize both man and woman, Jiazhi and Mr. They will realize this relationship can be dangerous, but they still proceed it. You see,
Yeah.
that's the last cause. But even though you feel it's caution, but you can do nothing about that because that's what we call love, right?
Yeah, that's human beings, definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
So I've got a little paragraph here about Julia Lovell, because when I picked up the book, I found there was no translator's note, no introduction, which would make sense because my edition was 5 different stories, 5 different translators. I'm guessing Penguin just spent money buying the rights from different places, so they weren't involved with the authors or translators. So anyway, I went looking online, just quickly found out a little bit about Julia Lovell. So she is a British person. She's a professor of Chinese history and literature in London, and she's translated 4 books. 4? Let's count them anyway. 4 different Chinese authors, 4 different pieces of fiction. So there's a collection of Lu Xun stories for Penguin. I think it's called The True Story of A.Q. and Other Stories. So there's that. There's Yan Lianke's History of Ma Qiao. Oh, no, sorry. There's History of Ma Qiao by Shao Gong, Serve the People by Yan Lianke, and then another collection of short stories by Zhu Wen. So Lost in Caution kind of sits as the odd one out in a way because it's itself a novella or a short story. So she's got all those. She's got some of her own history and political writing about China published as books, and then a few articles in places like the Times. So had you heard of Julia Lovell before getting ready for this podcast or before reading Lost in Caution?
I know her name. I know this is an excellent and well-known translator who is specifically good at Chinese works, but I haven't got the time to read her books before Lost Caution. Lost Caution is the first work I read translated by her. So that was brilliant work.
Yeah, I thought I hadn't seen her name before. But I realized when I saw her list of her own non-fiction books, one of them, it was called The Great Wall, China Against the World. That's in my local library branch, the Edinburgh Central Library, in the China section. But yeah, apart from that, I hadn't heard of her. I'd heard of, I think I'm not sure about Zhu Wen, but all those other authors she's translated, I've heard of them. I guess they're all very big names, at least in translated Chinese fiction. We're probably going to do. I've already done Lu Xun. I'll probably do some of the others on the show at some point. But yeah, that's Julia Lovell. So we've talked about Julia Lovell. More importantly, who is Eileen Chang? Who is Zhang Eileen? So I'll leave this one to you, Claire. Who is she? Who is she to you?
I think she's one of my she's one of my favorite female authors, and I think her work is very smart, and she have a particular insight about men and women and love. I think maybe she's too smart, and her cleverness may also lead to her own misfortune, not only just in her tragedy, the stories, but also about her personal life, her love story with Eileen Chang. And I think she the other works, and there's a common thing in her works is she's very good at looking out the hypocritical side of human nature. That is why all her works, you can think that it did. He will present love is so sweet, but you can't be too optimistic about them. That is maybe there's some similar thing about the woman, even modern woman, to what we think about love, because we're independent and well educated, and but we can't control our personal love life, and and it's difficult to handle and difficult to cope with some feelings inside of us.
So that's what you identify with. I did a little reading about her kind of life story, and I'll talk about the latter part of it first, because the early part of her life links into this story, I would say. So I learned I learned when I first started looking into translated Chinese fiction that even today, or perhaps especially today, there's a bit of a tendency for some Chinese writers, especially those who leave the country, to switch from writing in Chinese to English once they get international recognition. And that's kind of what Eileen Chang ended up doing. I guess she'd always had a bit of a link to the Western world. She'd been writing some things in English when she was younger. Apparently her mother chose her English name the same time she chose her Chinese name. So it's debatable which one is the first name. But anyway, she after the revolution, or just before the revolution, I think she left China. I forget if she went to Taiwan or America first, but she ended up in America as an American citizen, and had a go at writing some semi-autobiographical English books, which unfortunately didn't get published till after she died. But she did translate some Chinese fiction into English, which did get published. But yeah, it seems a little bit of at least in her literary career, seems a little bit unfair that she did get to be a successful writing kind of genius in China, and she probably deserved to continue being recognized as an older lady, but unfortunately just didn't happen. So that's the latter part of her life. The early part, so what I remember from my reading is that she has a few things, more than one or two things in common with the main character of Lost Caution, Jia Zhi. They both went off to Hong Kong to study when the Japanese invasion of China and Shanghai was going on. And they both had some similar romantic connections. I think you briefly mentioned those. Can you tell us a wee bit about that?
Can you repeat the last sentence?
So she had a relationship in her life which was a little bit similar to the relationship Jia Zhi gets into. She was married to a guy who was working with the puppet government at the time. Is that right?
Yes, that's what Hu Lancheng did, exactly the same in Lost Caution, and it's based on the true story about the as I said, Zheng Pingru and the Ding Mocun's story, but is basically like present herself, and that reflects somehow her personal life. There's another common there's another connection between Eileen Chang and Jia Zhi is you can read from the novel that Jia Zhi was abandoned by her dad, and her dad took her brother to the UK, to Britain, and just abandoned her left her in. She's basically abandoned, and maybe that's the key point, the key element to make her decide to accept this mission, to involve into this work. You see, Eileen Chang has the same. She was the lonely person as well, and she, as I said, pessimistic person as well. So I think that makes her kind of feel no roots, and couldn't be able to settle at that one place. That makes her to just relocate to another city again and again.
Yeah, well, I guess in the modern age, people like us who've moved around quite a bit maybe feel some of her pain. I know I feel a bit rootless these days.
Yeah,
getting to the point.
I think
yeah, because I'm near the end of my publishing course and facing probably not the same problem as international students like you face, but a similar one where gosh, it's getting very personal now, but I might have to chase my career down south in England, and the overseas students on the course, maybe you remember this, they're torn between staying and fighting for the working permit and the visa, or going back to their home countries. So yeah, rootlessness, it's not that's a problem that's not going away. In fact, as traveling gets easier, that's maybe a more common problem.
I spent lots of after graduation from Napier. I spent lots of time to find the proper work for myself, and I think I need to set up a specific target, and because rice manager is always what I want to do, and I experienced a few works before I found out. I landed at a job as a rice manager. So even though it's difficult, but I think it's totally worthy. If you try hard and stick with it, I think you will get repaid.
Well, it's a really cool place to be, and it's very closely tied to what the podcast's about, the whole cultural exchange, because this wasn't something I knew before I was on my course, and maybe a thing that wouldn't occur to our listeners, but a lot of publishing is about rights, and it's about selling books between basically different countries and different languages. So although the name doesn't sound super exciting, what you're doing is really exciting, because it's exchanging cultures around the world.
Exactly, and I think maybe that's the meaning of the project. The project podcast you are doing now, it is about exchange the culture, and to present, to make people knowing better about Chinese literature. As we discussed before, we're trying to separate our readers, our audiences from the film, because film is far more famous than this novel, but just because they have the very fundamental story structure that makes that film successful. That's one of the critical elements. So what we want to do is to explore the meaning of the literature about the book. So how it is inspired other areas about us.
Actually, I'm just trying to get famous on this podcast. That's my mission. But not really.
Yes, you will make it.
Yeah, maybe. It's good research for my dissertation anyway. So
what are you laughing at?
I'm laughing at I'm just wondering if I'll ever Hello? Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me? So after that talk about people traveling the world, I just wanted to tell the story this novel made on its journey to publication in Chinese and English. So there's some information online that I found that suggests that Eileen Chang may have begun writing a version of the story in English first before Chinese because a Hong Kong magazine called Muse, I think it was, released an English manuscript of this story in 2008. Its English name was Spy Ring. But in any case, officially, the Chinese version of Lust Caution was begun in the 1950s. But Eileen Chang was a bit of a perfectionist. She spent something like 2 decades redrafting it, and it finally got published in the late 70s over in Taiwan. And I believe, Claire, you were able to find the name of that publisher. Is that right?
Yes, that I think that newspaper called 中华时报
Yeah.
published in Taiwan.
China Times, right?
Yes, China Times.
Okay, so that's the history of the book. Now we're going to have a wee talk about the history behind the story. So it was set during what some of us would know as the Chinese part of World War II, but what might be known in China as the Chinese War against the Japanese invasion. So it's set in Shanghai at that time, and our villain, if you want to call him that, Mr. Yi, that our heroes are trying to kill, he's not Japanese. So Claire, maybe you could tell us who are our heroes trying to bring down and why.
I think we can start from the story of that the particular historical period that was after Xinhai Revolution. That's quite well known to the world, and then that is one of the contributor. He used to be the important contributor, but he chose to collaborate with Japan to set up a puppy government.
Puppet or puppy?
Sorry. Puppet.
Yeah, puppet.
Puppet government until he died. Just shortly after the end of the Second World War. I think this made him becomes the most hated person in China, because he's kind of traitor for our revolution and the war of resistance. So that is the government Mr. Yi served for. He's working under the Wang Jingwei. That's the background of that story. And Mr. Yi is just like less senior than Mr. Wang, and he's very important. I think his most responsibility is to arrest the people who fight against this government, and then he just similar. He's the traitor as well. That is why these students wanted to kill him.
Mm-hmm. And we should just clarify here, Wang Jingwei, he's a real historical figure. Mr. Yi is a fictional creation that's part of the story. But we were discussing earlier in a little bit of recording that a certain podcast host forgot to hit the record button for. There's a little bit of a parallel between Mr. Yi and Wang Jingwei, because in their youth, it seems like they were optimistic, cheerful people, and now something's gone wrong. So I learned that when I was researching Wang Jingwei, because I'd never heard of him before I read this story, so I thought, oh, I need to Google this man. Like you said, Claire, he was involved in China's first revolution that launched the Republic of China and was kind of a revolutionary figure. But things turned sour for him when Japan invaded, and his kind of approach was to try and seek peace, avoid further confrontation, which is, no one can say peace is a bad idea, but it led him to basically give up to the Japanese and run a government that did what the Japanese told it to do, whilst the real Chinese government had been chased off to Chongqing, which is why in the story, I think when Nanjing government is mentioned, that's the puppet government. The Chongqing government, that's the kind of the last of the rebels against the Japanese. Is that about accurate?
I think that's basically the correct. But I think Eileen Chang wants to present to the audiences. He that is the implication for audiences that is that a man is growing the journey of a man's growing up. You see, Mr. Yi, he has some connection with Wang Jingwei, and they used to be young. They've been, as you said, passionate for the future of a revolution, and they have a faith. They had faith in what they did, and then the things went wrong, and then the life was tough. So but the at the early stage is pretty much similar to what the students act in this story, because they just like the early phase of Mr. Yi. So Eileen Zhang wants to present this interesting life's journey. Just we all expected things differently at the very beginning, and what we got after over growing up, we got the things we do not want.
And you said
Or the
it's
way around.
Yeah, you said a man's life. Do you think the same applies to ladies, or do you think men are
So
more likely to end up compromised?
Yes, just like describe the man's different phases. Maybe the first phase is the man, like uh, uh, the young guy in the novel, just Jiazhi's student who lead the theater group. And the second phase is another phase in the revolution. That's the people who trained Jiazhi becomes a spy. And the third phase is the Mr. Yi, because Mr. Yi is older than all the other figures, and he is most sophisticated. And this person from Eileen Zhang's writing is very complicated.
What I want to ask is, do you think that would apply to the journey a woman goes through life as well as a man, or do you think this is a specifically male thing, or a specifically male thing from the time Eileen Chang was writing?
I just want to say it's the because it's just not a feminism novel, but it is from the female angle. But it's very interesting to write about the man, because man is not dominant in this novel. It mostly is about how judges think about the issue of, or how to think about to cope the problem. But it's very interesting to present how the different phases of a man, and how they treat the woman. That's maybe yes.
Good answer. So, last question about the history of the story. So, as I said, when I first read this story, I hadn't seen the name Wang Jingwei before, although I suppose I had, because I'd seen the film a few years before. But as we've talked about in our aborted recording, I watched it after dinner with my dad, after a couple of beers, had a couple more beers whilst I was watching, and that didn't help me kind of follow the historical context. It took me a while to realize that Mr. Yi was also Chinese, because I hadn't heard of the puppet government before. I thought he was Japanese, although I think I realized it eventually. But so the question I want to ask you is, do you think a Western or non-Asian reader would benefit from a little introduction to the story, maybe from the translator or from the publisher? Or do you think it works on its own as a universal human drama about love and compromising and all these things?
I think it will help people to get more involved into this history, and get further understanding about whatever happened in the past. This history, particularly in China, is very special I think it is part of revolution, is part of our countries developing, because how they cope with the people and how they act in this background is just it's just like, I think Eileen Chang want to describe, it's just like the students in this novel. It's just like the revolutionist early stage, which presents immature and helpless and aimless. So that's what Eileen Chang wants to present, the common feeling at that age.
Yeah.
How people feel about government, how they feel about the ordinary life, because where Eileen Chang is good at putting the small people, like the ordinary people, into this large historical background, and then telling them, just present the people really helpless and they couldn't be able to control their fate.
As I said to you before, when I was slightly drunk and watching the film, I found myself getting very frustrated at how ineffective our student heroes were. Maybe because the actors were perhaps a little bit older in appearance than the characters were. But I think I was basically missing the point, is that it's not really about heroes achieving a political goal. It's about fallible, vulnerable human beings kind of making some very easy human mistakes.
Well, the human nature is delicate, and love is more delicate. So that's what Eileen Chang wants to. That's how this work great in this work. This is what we call it. When we think about this, what happened?
So to explain to our listeners who heard some screaming, I live in very central Edinburgh, in a area where a lot of tourists come through, and a lot of Edinburgh stores have like a gothic or spooky angle. So this is something I hear like every week. A tour group comes in, and then one of the people working for the tour company runs out with a bell and goes, "Ah!" and then everyone screams. So just some tourism happening outside my window.
I didn't live in the central Edinburgh. I live in the Morningside. It's quite close to our campus.
Yeah. Right. So we've got 3 little quotes from our story, and Claire had the really smart idea to do little bilingual excerpts, partly to let you guys who've seen the film but not read the book hear the actual words of the story, so you can separate the two, but also so you can feel or be more aware that this is a work of translation, and especially for any of our listeners who have a good understanding of Chinese, this should be extra fun for you guys.
陪欢场女子买东西，她是老手了，只一旁随侍，总使人不注意她。此刻的微笑也丝毫不带讽刺性，不过有点悲哀。她的侧影迎着台灯，目光下视。睫毛像米色的鹅翅，歇落在瘦瘦的面颊上，在他看来是一种温柔怜惜的神情。这个人是真爱我的，他突然想，心下轰然一声，若有。
Okay, so thank you for that reading, Claire. Here's the same thing in English. He was an old hand at this, taking his paramour shopping, ministering to their whims, retreating into the background while they made their choices. But there was, she noted again, no cynicism in his smile just then, only sadness. He sat in silhouette against a lamp, seemingly sunk into an attitude of tenderly affectionate contemplation. His downcast eyelashes tinged the dull cream of moth's wings as they rested on his gaunt cheeks. He really loves me, she thought. Inside, she felt a raw tremor of shock, then a vague sense of loss. So yeah, if anyone ever looks at me like Jiazhi looks at Mr. Yi, I know I'm doing good, because it's a really nice description.
只有现在，紧张地拉长到永恒的这一刹那间，这室内小阳台上一灯盈然，映衬着楼下门窗上一片白色的天光。有着印度人在旁边，只有更觉得是他们俩在灯下单独相对，又密切 有拘束，还从来没有过。但是就连此刻，他也再也不会想到他爱不爱他，而是
Only now, as this last tense moment of calm stretched infinitely out on this cramped balcony, the artificial brightness of its lamplight contrasting grubbily with the pale sky visible through the door and windows downstairs, could she permit herself to relax and inquire into her own feelings. Somehow, the nearby presence of the Indian, bent over his writing desk, only intensified her sense of being entirely alone with her lover. But now was not the moment to ask herself whether she loved him. Instead, she needed to, and then the sentence cuts. So it's just before she saves Mr. Yi's life and dooms her own life. And the next little excerpt is after Jia Zhi and all her comrades have been killed, and we're kind of looking at things from Mr. Yi's perspective.
他对战局并不乐观，知道他将来怎样，得一知己，死而无憾。他觉得他的影子会永远依傍他，安慰他。虽然他恨他，他最后对他的感情强烈到是什么感情都不相干了，只是有感情。他们是原始的猎人与猎物的关系，胡与昌的关系，最终极的战友。他这才生是他的人，死是他的。
Oh, I think the connection went funny on the very last Chinese character there. So It was ghost, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, here's that last paragraph translated into English, Julia Lovell's version. He was not optimistic about the way the war was going, and he had no idea how it would turn out for him. But now that he had enjoyed the love of a beautiful woman, he could die happy, without regret. He could feel her shadow forever near him, comforting him. Even though she had hated him at the end, she had at least felt something. And now he possessed her utterly, primitively, as a hunter does his quarry, a tiger his kill. Alive, her body belonged to him. Dead, she was his ghost. So, pretty dark stuff. It's weird, because on one hand, we can see that he's quite sad and upset and worried the end of his life's probably coming near. On the other hand, he's really enjoying thinking about how he owns this woman and the fact she's dead. He owns her forever. So makes me have really mixed feelings about Mr. Yi. Because he seems to me, he seems almost like a pervert here.
Yes, indeed. I think that is very important scene written in this novel, that is buying the ring. Just we discussed earlier about the ring is very important symbol in this in this novel. The tricky thing is actually the clue hidden by Eileen Chang in this novel, because the name of the lady is Jia Zhi, and Jia Zhi is the same pronunciation as Shanghai language as ring, is exactly the same pronunciation. So that's the very interesting thing, and for this one. And I think at the very beginning of this novel, they describe about they playing mahjong. So Angus, do you know something about the games of mahjong?
I've played a simplified version of it with some Chinese friends. So I know it's a little bitty is it I forget. It's got a little bit in common with a few Western card games where you've got to match the numbers or the suits and then lay them down as a set. But I only have that very superficial understanding. If you put mahjong in front of me, I would have forgotten how to play it.
I think that's very important to present the connection between Yi Tai Tai, Mrs. Yi, that's Mr. Yi's wife, and Jia Zhi is she acts the role as the fake Mrs. Mai, which she highly active. She was highly active in this high society women. They drink tea, and they played mahjong, and they discussed about what happens now, at the situation during the war. So that's even though that's from women's angle, but that is the opportunity that Jia Zhi collecting the information from them. And I think there's interesting detail about while playing mahjong is the people the way that may be difficult for Western people to understand about this how this game work, because this game you need to that is the you need to fulfill some certain objective, and so one of them is you need to collect set of tiles from others.
Yeah.
Can you understand that? And then sometimes you 吃 it means eat, and you have to collect the same suit within 3 tiles, right? A run of 3 tiles in the same suit. But the peng is identical tiles you collect, and the peng is always the priority than 吃. For example, if 4 players, you're 2 of us involved in this game, if I want to peng to have these identical tiles which you want to eat, if I want this badge, you can't have it, you lose it. So peng is basically aggressive action in this game. So Eileen Chang described a little bit about this game to describe Jia Zhi's status within this woman's, because she still remain at a low level of this structure of this social connection, social networks. Can you understand that?
I can. I think partly because I was kind of, what's the word, primed to read mahjong scenes in that way, because the last film I saw a mahjong scene, I don't know if you saw the film, Crazy Rich Asians. Did you see that?
I think I did it. I heard of it. I haven't seen it, but there's lots of my Western friends said that was very funny.
It was good, but the kind of the big dramatic showdown, it's between 2 ladies, a junior and a senior, and they have their showdown in a mahjong game, and it was definitely, I think the scene could work in 2 ways. If you understand how the game works, then you could see the kind of hidden level, but even if you couldn't, you could tell the whole thing was about status, and the fact that the younger lady is able to play a winning hand shows that she's now on the level of the older lady. But I don't think it's not an impossible game for a Westerner to understand, because it's got the same thing Western card games do, where you've got a hand of cards and you've got to kind of keep them quiet and play psychological mind games with the other players. But the details you were saying about peng and shi, it's that's the level that someone like me still doesn't quite get, because I've not played the game much.
And that is also about they comparing each other's ring. You see,
right?
The size of their diamond. That is that's a kind of what we call it. That's just the human nature of a woman. They always compete with each other with the material and what they call the physical material.
Material.
Yes, they will compete against material, and then Jia Zhi, because she used to be, she's just student, she's the youngest, so she has even the film they represent the Ali arranged Jia Zhi wearing the smallest one on that table.
Speaking of material things, a thing I noticed was the description of the decoration, the jewelry, the clothes, which kind of made it really clear these are rich people, but especially the clothes. And I think I saw when I was doing research for the episode, some people have taken note that Eileen Chang really makes an effort to describe what clothes people are wearing. And in the film, you could see they've done it as well. And I know that just in her own personal life, Eileen Chang was always wearing fashionable clothes. She was quite known for her chipaos, and they're on display in the film. And I'm pretty sure chipaos get described in quite a lot of detail in the story as well. Is that something that jumps out at you in the same way?
It's not particularly for all the women, but that is the basic expectation about women, to show people they want to themselves more elegant and just Eileen Chang has a reputation as being very proud. She's a proud lady, and she acts like very talented. So that just makes her lonely and somehow isolated with the average people and ordinary people. But since you mentioned about the fashion in this novel, because that's another background is Eileen Zhang try to link Hong Kong and Shanghai. That's two cities.
Right.
Again, yes, because she used to describe the women in Hong Kong before, and in her previous works, and Shanghai is more likely at that time that was the international city as well. So that gathering all the different ideas, all the different perspectives, different public figures. So that's maybe she wants to present another thing to the audience her reading. That's another, because she's very good at describing all the details happened in that age. That's why I like her.
Mm-hmm. A little piece of background detail I noticed in the book, and I guess also it's there in the film. So we meet some Indian characters. There's mention of German cafes, and it's mentioned, I think, just once in the story that in the film as well, the apartments that used to have the British and the Americans and maybe the French are all empty because those guys have been taken off to prisons by the Japanese at this point. But it's never focused on a lot. It's just one little piece of the picture that's only going to be there if you can spot it. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, she described in narrated everything practically, and how people connected, and how things went, who came over. That's she will state it very clearly about use these details to describe people's character.
So fast forwarding slightly, or moving on to the next question rather. So we've ended up, whether we wanted to or not, we've ended up mentioning the film version quite a lot. So you've seen the film. I watched the film as preparation for the episode just after I read the story. How long ago was the last time you watched the movie version of Lost Caution?
I think just right about our podcast. I think a week ago.
All right. Okay. Oh, okay.
I just but the first time is, I think, just in the year that the film released.
So I was reading just today, actually, that the film got not an amazing reaction in the West. I think it didn't get a lot of attention and didn't get a lot of amazing reviews. But in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, some people who reviewed it and some members of the general public loved it, and other reviewers and other members of the public were really unhappy with it. And there's maybe some reasons for that. Have you noticed similar opinions among people you've met, or do you think reactions have calmed down a bit over the years?
I think Ali, from my opinion, he was just trying to enlarge the mental feeling of the original novel, because this, as I said, is Eileen Chang rated very calm and in a mild manner, but this is hidden with a very emotion. It's a strong emotion. Ali just trying to to progress people's relationship, just Mr. E and Mrs. Mai, just Mai Tai Tai, what we call 家之, because they want to, as you can say, their relationship got involved over the 3 sex scenes showing presented to us. The first one was very, untrusted her, and just basically to explore her, like whether or not she had a weapon on her body, right? And
Right.
just not, it is really unkind. And second time is a build up the deeper connection with each other, because they're building up the trust. And then the third one is just simply present deliver the 2 information to us. The first is Mr. E started trusting Jia Zhi because she permitted her to cover her eyes. Remember, use the pillow.
Yeah.
The second information was that Jia Zhi felt her fallen in relationship completely, and she couldn't control herself, and she couldn't be able to be rescued from this trap, and she cried, remember, at that scene. So I think that film perfectly presented how she felt about how Eileen Chang was trying to convey to the audiences, even at that age, that's the real last caution. So that makes that film being awarded at many country.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that most of the film had that same very calm tone, but there are a few explosive scenes. So there's the 3 sex scenes. I think this is the first one, especially. That's an absolutely crazy scene. It's so intense. But also there's the bit where the guy gets stabbed, the guy who's going to inform on them. And there's nothing as wild as that in the story, because it's all in the backstory, and yet it fits. It's like he's it almost feels like An Lee or whoever wrote the script had psychic powers and just reached back into the past, into Eileen Chang's mind. And I don't know, because it all fits so well, but it doesn't, like, none of it feels out of place.
The funny thing is there's no erotic description in the original novel at all. The
Yeah.
only implication about they had relationship or they had sex is Jia Zhi described about being just saying was with him when she was with him. That's it. Just no further talk and description about this. I simply think that maybe it's just not for me to talk about this film being judged and being criticized, but I think all the works, if they present it completely honestly to the audiences about how figures, the how the novels, or how the characters feeling, it all it will lead these consequences, because human nature is complicated. It somehow will reach out to some people's mind and synchronize with it, right?
Yeah, well, I guess, like you said, everything they added, or everything that was added, fit the characters, all the things they did. Even like when you see the kind of angry side of Mr. Yi in the extra things in the film, you can kind of feel a little bit of that dark side of him, especially at the end when he's having his strange dark thoughts.
Yes, as you said, I think in our last to previously talked, because you read lots of spy novels and just like 007 films, but this one, Jia Zhi is obviously is not a well trained spy, and she just really immature and the spy, and she didn't present she didn't she just consider herself completely as a Mrs. Mai, and instead of distracting herself from this role, that's she just get attached too much.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of identities and names in the film, something I noticed was so I downloaded the film. Don't tell the police. Downloaded it illegally. And the
No, please
subtitles.
don't mention about in this podcast.
The file came with subtitles, and the subtitles were really good. But there was one thing that made them different from the Penguin version I was reading. So I don't know how Julia. I'm guessing Julia Lovell, when she translated the work, she kept the characters' names as Pinyin Mandarin names, but I'm not certain because in the film, everyone's name was rendered in Cantonese. I
Yes.
think so. Mr. Yi was Yee.
Yi.
Um,
Yes, Yee. That's Cantonese.
yeah.
价值.
So and yeah, do you know Jiazhi's Cantonese name?
Yeah, I think Gaji is Gaji.
Gaji, right. I would need to look back to verify all that, but it was just something I noticed. And as someone who always lived in Mandarin speaking China, I was furious.
Oh,
I wasn't
no.
really furious.
I don't know. People angry for reason, but you can't guarantee all the people angry for the right reason, right?
Yeah, I wasn't really angry. It was interesting anyway. So I think that's all the notes I've got on the story. Is there anything I've missed that you'd like to say about Lost Caution before we move along?
I think this is pretty much what we want to talk. I will check a little bit.
So we know each other through the Edinburgh Napier publishing course, and it's led you in the fullness of time as an awesome job as a rights manager. But what I want to ask is what led you to study publishing in the first place?
Well, I originally loved reading when I was not very young, but in a teenager, right? My dad is a book lover. He got lots of amazing physical books at his bookshelf, and I was highly encouraged to explore all the answers from the book, and then I think it's good for me is my dad will explain what is or interpret for me about what is meaning when I was at early age.
Oh, that's great.
That is the inspiration about I continue. That's my first very early connection with books. And then I got opportunity when I study in the drama in my postgraduate in China. I got my second year permission to go to the abroad to study another degree. So I was encouraged by my mentor to evaluate what is suitable for me to study, and then he suggested at that moment is publishing, but magazine publishing at that time was my favorite because there's a journalism course got involved in that in that program. So so I chose magazine publishing and this is Edinburgh Napier University, as that is the capital city in Scotland. So I think it maybe it's a center and easier for me to collaborate and network in maybe to attend different events in that city. That is the original intention to choose Edinburgh and Edinburgh Napier University. And when I got into that course, I realized that was very intensive and practical course. But there's only 2 Chinese students at that moment in our course, so it's and it's very difficult at very beginning because you at the first 3 months I could understand completely, and then then it get better with the help of Derek and Avril and Dave and Dave McCluskey. Did I pronounce correctly?
Um, so yeah, there's Avril, Derek, Dave McCluskey, and then there's Alistair McCleary. Are you thinking of him?
I Yes, I'm thinking I'm thinking of
Right.
him.
I see.
That was very supportive, and it just across the whole process of my study, and that was give me a lot of help, and so I pick up quite quickly. So that is how I miss about Edinburgh. There's a lot of fond memories there. You see.
We have now got 0 Chinese students this year. We've got 1 Asian student. She's Indian.
Okay.
But
So
I'm glad that the course and the teachers were so accommodating and welcoming. That's great.
yes, that's great. That's just how I love UK and how I love this country because I think you can see my profile description. That is Edinburgh. I miss Edinburgh forever and always. That is the wonders of this city, and just more than my just profession studied, but also there's a lot of friendships developed in that city.
Oh man, I'm getting emotional. Well, I'm
Yeah,
glad
you
that
should.
I'm glad Edinburgh was so good to you. That's awesome.
Yes,
So
yes, indeed.
what I'd like to ask is, what led you to your current rights managing job? Was it an interesting journey?
You mean how I get this job, right?
Yeah, basically.
I originally started to do. I started my career um, as a journalist, publishing journalist, while I studied in the UK, and then I got introduced to me to do the digital rights manager in the largest ebooks suppliers. I was doing the digital rights clearance. We promote the digital format to the print journals. I was in charge of Shanghai at that moment,
Wow.
to collaborate all the print rights, get digital distribution at that time. And then 6 months after, and then they transferred me to Beijing. That's the headquarter. That's how I built up the connection with Beijing. So that was very. And then when I after arrival in Beijing, I got introduced to this place, and then I know my current boss, so I become her rights manager and attend the different book fairs. So that's it's not easy, but I think luckily I finally got it. So I'm really glad I got what I like to do.
Yeah, well done. I'm extremely jealous.
Don't be. I think you will be more excellent in this role because I only can speak English, but you can speak lots of European language.
Oh
This is
no,
how
I really can't. I speak I speak even less German than I speak Chinese, and that's it.
Chinese is a fantastic. This is difficult for you, right?
It's tricky, but the grammar is easy. German grammar is a nightmare.
Right. Yes, it is.
是的. So, 是的. Genau, as they say in Germany. Genau. Yeah, so one thing I've been trying to kind of learn, but haven't really found any good ways to do so, is find out if there's any really big differences between the literature that makes it from Chinese into English through translation and gets read by English speakers versus the Chinese books and authors that people inside China read. So this is a really big, vague question, but what do you think are the most popular kinds of fiction or some common things about fiction that's really popular with Chinese readers? Is it anything special?
You mean the literature or all the categories of fiction?
Fiction, so stories, yeah.
Okay, I think scientific fiction is quite famous now.
Right.
Yes, because do you know Santi?
Of course, yeah.
Yes, Santi is after that
Three body
awarded.
problem.
Yes, and that is the film, the original novel called A Wandering Earth.
Yep.
And then that's a successful adaptation to the film called the same name. That is, the film didn't present quite successfully because it didn't present that is ignored lots of details and very important details in that novel. But that makes novel more interesting. I like that scientific one.
Yeah, I saw the film on Netflix. It got an international Netflix release recently, and yeah, I was pretty unimpressed. But
yes.
I've got the collection of short stories, and yeah, Liu Cixin, he's so cool.
Well, that may be some knowledge of the physics, not quite logical, but is still attractive enough for the general reader to read, just as me.
So, have you enjoyed or have you heard about any other newer Chinese sci-fi writers recently? Because Liu Cixin, he's kind of like the big boss now.
Yes, Liu Cixin, and he got criticism, lots of criticism now as well. But both the compliment and the criticism, well, others I think you can explore on the Douban Yuedu, because they're gathering some excellent readers right on that platform, and then some people will collect some unscientific category. Scientific fiction category is still quite famous there. So I will send you the link afterwards.
Thank you.
Yes, it's called 豆瓣阅读. That's 豆瓣 read. That's a good way to find the good author as well. And another way, I think, I haven't got time to read lots of scientific fictions, but I will do it in next month, which I will be on my annual leave. So I will keep that. I will have that time to read. I plan to read that during my holiday.
So the next question. So I've asked you which kind of books people like to read in China, but here's a more specific question. Which kind of books from overseas do you think Chinese people like to read? So things that have been translated from other languages into English. What do you think are some really popular types of foreign novels or foreign fiction in China?
No. It's a complicated question because it can't. Because there's too many books. We buy the translation, the foreign books translated into Chinese, right? And I mean the category specifically in fact.
Sorry.
Then you mean the category is you refer to the fiction, literature.
Fiction, yeah. Because I remember
literature fiction.
In Chinese bookshops, I would see quite a lot of American or foreign books about business or science, and I would see I would see foreign classics, older foreign books, but newer ones I don't remember. But maybe it was just because I couldn't read the book covers because they were in Chinese.
It's difficult for me as well to identify its original book, because when we buy the rights, afterwards we may change the book cover to reflect the local market. You see, you have to change to apply it to Chinese aesthetic. So it's difficult to know, but if you want to find a specific book, I will let you know which publisher it would be, right?
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for that.
Well, it's a good. I hope I will co-host maybe in some other interesting subject, but this one, I really I'm really glad to talk over here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So that's about all we're going to talk about today. Thank you all so much for listening. I found a little essay on the translator, Julia Lovell. There's a link to the PDF where you can read that in the show notes. It's about her translation of Han Xiaogong's novel, not of Lost Caution, but it's a fun little nugget for you to enjoy. Don't forget, if you want to support the show, there's also links in the show notes to my Buy Me a Coffee site and the Patreon, where there's a little bonus chat with Claire. You can follow the show on Instagram at Trchfic, TRCHFIC. That's where you'll find out all the news about the show and what episode's coming up and whatnot. And I've also got a Twitter you can find me on. It's called Angus, at Angus Likes Books. Claire, just remind us one more time, where can we find you online?
Yes, my Twitter's user's name is TONE826, and my Instagram's user's name is CHENTONGPUB, Chentongpub. Yes. Okay,
well, thank you so much. This is normally where I'd say what the next episode's going to be, but actually I've got no idea what the next episode's going to be, so just get on the Instagram and you'll find out there at some point. Anyway, thank you for listening, and 再见.
再见. Thank you. Thank you, Angus.
And breathe out.
Bye.
Okay. Well done. So, I guess.过去就像脑里翻腾的喧嚣，繁星在梦里闪耀，让欢乐一点，让欢乐一点，不要让疑问留停在心间。